The threats to our democracy the president spoke about tonight that we are once again facing in the run-up to the midterm elections come from a variety of sources. There are, I think, two main categories. On one side, there are the suits, lawyers, government officials working within the system to undermine our free and fair elections. In the run-up to January 6th, this included people like Jeffrey Clark of the Department of Justice, who tried to help Donald Trump spread lies about election fraud under the cover of the imprimatur of the Department of Justice, as well as Trump's lawyer, John Eastman, author of the infamous coup memo. And then on the other side are the vigilantes, the people who show up with weapons and threaten political violence. This group includes the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, violent gangs that organized the actual storming of the Capitol on January 6th. These two sides worked in tandem to execute the Trump coup. They ultimately failed. And today we have big developments in the investigations into both fronts. New evidence presented in court today in the trial of members of the Oath Keepers revealed that the founder, Elmer Stewart Rhodes III, tried to get Donald Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act in the days after January 6th. In a message intended for the ex-president, Rhodes wrote in part, quote, "If you don't, then Biden, Kamala will turn all that power on your family and all of us. You and your family will be imprisoned and killed. You and your children will die in prison." That evidence was revealed on the very same day. We got to see several emails that John Eastman was recently ordered to turn over to the January 6th committee. Last month, a federal judge ruled those emails contain evidence of possible criminal activity and are therefore not covered by Eastman's claims of attorney-client privilege. And the emails indeed show that Eastman and some of his fellow coup plotters were trying to tee up an emergency appeal of the election results in Georgia that would go before Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Another Trump lawyer, Kenneth Chesebro, wrote to Eastman in December 2020 that persuading Justice Thomas might be, quote, our only chance to get a favorable judicial opinion by January 6th, which might hold up the Georgia count in Congress. Of course, this was not a random choice. Lawyers believe with good reason that Justice Thomas may be sympathetic to their cause. Eastman's a former clerk for Thomas. He was in contact with the justice's wife, conservative activist Ginny Thomas, during this period. Ian Bassin served as associate White House counsel to President Obama. He's now the founding and executive director of Protecting Democracy, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to preventing the decline of our democracy. And he joins me now. Ian, I want to start on this revelation about this plot to tee this up for Justice Thomas. There's this system whereby, these emergency appeals for a given circuit of the federal courts go up to an individual justice who can issue essentially a temporary stay. And we've seen this happen a few times with various matters. In this case, Georgia would be Justice Thomas. So there's a geographic logic here. But of course, it says something remarkable about Chesebro and Eastman's judgment of Justice Thomas's possible complicity and character that they were the ones trying to tee this up for Justice Thomas.
Yeah, I think we already know from what those plotters are suggesting where Justice Thomas may stand on this. But I also want to suggest, Chris, a third possible leg of the stool. You identified two, the vigilantes and the suits, the bureaucrats and the lawyers. But there was a third really crucial piece of this plot in 2020, and that was the elected officials, right? If you think about what Trump did in 2020, first he called on state legislators. Right, he tried to fly the leaders of the Republican caucus in Michigan, to put the screws to them in the Oval Office. Secretaries of state, right? He tried to twist Brad Raffensperger's arm to find 11,000 votes. Governors, leaning on governors not to certify Joe Biden's win. And then ultimately, members of Congress who he tried to pressure, including with the violent mob, this is where the vigilantes come in, to overthrow the results. But all those elected officials declined to go along with it. And so what did Trump set out to do from pretty much right after the election? Replace all those officials with people who would be more loyal to him. He's intervened in state legislative races around the country. He has handpicked candidates like Kari Lake and Mark Finchem in Arizona, right? Like Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania, like Tim Michels in Wisconsin, like J.D. Vance in Ohio. He's handpicked and endorsed them because he expects them to be loyal to him the next time. And so while Trump is not personally named on the ballot next week, he's very much on the ballot in that all these handpicked loyalists are installed. Then the plot that we're talking about here that failed in 2020 will have a much more successful chance of overturning our democracy next time.
And in fact, to your point, he's kind of what you might call a single issue voter on this. And we saw this in this tape that came out. We played on the program where he calls Blake Masters after he's the handpicked Trump candidate for Senate, Republican Party in Arizona. He's definitely got a shot at winning that race, tight race. And he calls me, basically says, yeah, you did fine the debate. There's one thing you got to keep hammering on: the election was rigged. You got to keep hammering on the election rigged. That's the most important. That is all he cares about. It's by his own lights, what he has focused on. And when we come to election night, I mean, one of the things that I'm sort of looking for is, who concedes and how, and what does Trump and his allies try to do? I'm wondering what you're looking for as we head towards it.
Well, I also would note that Elmer Stewart Rhodes, in the text message he played, gets that as well. Because what was his appeal to Trump? You and your family, right? It wasn't our country is in danger.
Yes.
It was they're going to come after you. Right. He understood exactly how to speak to Donald Trump. And the way that Trump has picked these candidates, Lake in Arizona and Michaels in Wisconsin, et cetera, is because he knows that they will be loyal to him, to Donald Trump, over loyalty to their state, over loyalty to their voters. So in terms of what I'm looking for next week, I mean, here's where I'm going to bring a dose of optimism to this. I think I also have deep faith in the American people. I think one thing that Joe Biden was alluding to in a speech earlier was, even with all of these groups of Americans who are attacking truth, who are attacking, who are sort of emboldening violence, Biden still has faith that we can come together in common purpose. He called for unity. He called for this coalition of Democrats, of independents. He was very clear. He said MAGA Republicans are a minority of the party. There are lots of Republicans who believe in our democracy. And what he was calling for, I think, is a lesson that we can take from other countries. This happened in Eastern Europe and the Czech Republic when they had to throw an autocrat out of office. They had to build a coalition of people who had to put aside their policy differences, put aside the normal political tribes that they adhere to, and come together about things that are more fundamental, which is our freedom, our system of government. And right now, unfortunately, the blunt truth is only the Democratic Party is fully committed to those things. And so we have to come together and support those who believe in the fundamentals of our democracy, in the hopes that sometime in the future, we really need is a healthier Republican Party that can provide alternative policies, but not an authoritarian alternative to American constitutional democracy. I think we can do that next week, but I want to turn back to something that Michael Beschloss said earlier, which is the only way it can happen here is if we convince ourselves that it can't.